Dr. David G. Kline was my grandfather. We called him Dr. Grandpa, or simply Grandpa. He was more than a pioneering neurosurgeon. He was a steadfast father, a compassionate mentor, and an inspiring leader. His influence extended far beyond the operating room, touching the lives of patients, colleagues, and loved ones alike.
We never had a sit-down, free-ranging talk over a beer, so I can only surmise early life events that influenced Dave. Dave's father died quite suddenly when he was young, and most of his subsequent upbringing was overseen by his beloved mother. This love notwithstanding, I think that Dave felt somewhat bereft, owing to his father's absence, the loss of an easily discernible role model. Dave grew up in Philadelphia, infused with Dutch-German sense of seriousness and purpose. Though I doubt that his mom ever expressed it exactly like this, I'm sure her expectations for her prized son were similar to that of Noah Webster's father, a descendant of earnest New England Puritans, who beseeched Noah, quote, to do good in the world and be useful. And so Dave did. With his intense brown eyes and thoughtful, measured responses, he projected intelligent earnestness and sincerity. He went to the University of Pennsylvania on scholarship, majored in chemistry, area of study not to be taken lightly. Dave represented the ideal University of Pennsylvania graduate. With such accomplishments, Dave would have been eagerly sought by any medical school, but he chose to stay at Penn. And while studying medicine, he must have thought of neurosurgery because he elected to intern at the University of Michigan, which had one of the country's premier neurosurgical programs.
We had a tremendous hunger and thirst for knowledge. We supported each other in that I understood his passion. And then we had our firstborn, Susan Carroll. Then it was time he graduated medical school and he went to University of Michigan for his internship and then started his neurosurgical residency. By then we had two more children. We had Robert, David, and Nancy.
At the time, neurosurgeons were trained to do it all. Operations on the brain, the spine, the nerves. The unique technique that Dave brought to the surgical treatment of peripheral nerve injuries and tumors was electrical stimulation and recordings of such stimulations along damaged nerves. Dave modestly suggested, quote, some technique of evoking electrical nerve responses through an area of nerve injury may be helpful to the neurosurgeon deciding whether or not to resect the area of an injured nerve. May be helpful. The understatement of a young neurosurgeon presenting his new technique to a tradition-bound neurosurgical world. In his heart and mind, Dave knew that nerve recordings directly off the injured nerve to solidify surgical decision-making was the way forward. And he's built his neurosurgical career on this premise.
So over 2 generations, Dr. Kline trained dozens of individuals who have now taken on and embarked on a career where they look after patients with peripheral nerve injuries, tumors, and other disorders. And many of the things that Dr. Kline did are exactly what we emulate today in managing these patients so that they too can have the excellent outcomes and change in their life for the better that Dr. Kline introduced.
The feeling that the residents, myself included, had about Dr. Kline, you know, he was literally a father figure. You could feel his love and his protection. And I really needed that probably more than most because I didn't have anybody here. You know, I was almost fresh off the boat and didn't have any friends, didn't have any, anybody. And all the residents had that same feeling. He had your back at all times. So throughout my residency, I had this feel of being protected and loved.
Dave came to LSU School of Medicine in 1967. Owing to his academic excellence and clinical excellence, he became head of the Division of Neurosurgery in 1971. He was made full professor in 1975, and owing to his leadership and diplomatic skills, became chairman of the newly founded Department of Neurosurgery, also in 1975. Dave received 4 honors. In 1995, he was named the LSU Boyd Professor, the university's highest academic honor. The medical school has only 8 Boyd Professors. America's largest neurosurgical society, the American Association of Neurological Surgeons, gave Dave his highest award, the Cushing Medal, in 2006, and the Congress of Neurological Surgeons and the Neurosurgical Society of America also medaled Dave. As I observed from making rounds with Dave at Charity Hospital, he was compulsive and meticulous in his care for patients, assuring that each got optimal, humane care.
At Mardi Gras, legendary, the only night he would sort of take off 365 days would be the night before the crew dinner at Antoine's. Afterwards, everyone was going to join one of the parades, and somebody was begging, and they came up to David Kline, and then David looked at his hands and saw that his hand didn't seem robust. David then did a very thorough exam of all the hand muscles of this person, because bless his heart, he thought maybe there was some atrophy, and he went into the doctor mode. And I think, the story in Mardi Gras was just a beautiful one, because this was his core, is treating people at Charity Hospital and treating people on the road when he was lost in the parade.
Dad lived, breathed medicine. I was very thankful for that during a time where I really, really needed that. And it was back in 2002 where my husband, Bill, he was at work, and I got a phone call from one of his coworkers saying what they thought he either had a heart attack or seizure. First thing I thought of was to call my dad. I needed my dad. I needed not only him to comfort me, but to really help me through the medical process. So Dad was there for me. He flew in the middle of the morning. First thing he did was he made sure that Bill had the best neurosurgeon that was available. When Bill went off to surgery, Dad stuck by my side in the waiting room. The neurosurgeon came in and said that the surgery had gone the best that it could have gone. I remember feeling something on my thigh, somebody grabbing my thigh, and I looked, and it was my dad. And he said, "Nancy, yes, that's huge. That's wonderful that the surgery went so well." But he said, honestly, the next 24 hours is critical. A lot can happen in the next 24 hours, and you need to be prepared for that. Always so very thankful that my dad was there with me to help me. I couldn't have gone through all of that without him.
We remember him as being a very, very passionate family man. He was also there the moment that Janet Graham suffered a stroke that ended up taking her life, and was very helpful managing that through that process with our family.
He would be the mentor for young people. Working in the gardens was really not so much the point, I think, to him, as it was that relationship and being somebody who could make a difference in someone's life.
Given for what he did in Katrina, when everybody else left, when the helicopters came and took the white patients away from other hospitals and left the black patients in the hospital, and David stayed. lack of electricity, no elevators. So I mean, that was so typical of him. You know, when I heard about that, when he told me about it, I wasn't surprised.
His only hobby was sailing. The reason he loved sailing was because when he got out on the lake, his beeper didn't work. So that was the only time he really had to himself, because when he'd get out on the lake, he felt like he, wouldn't be bothered. And so every Sunday he was out on the lake.
I have one story that I don't think has ever been told. So Roger and Dave and the two boys were sailing in Lake Pontchartrain on a beautiful weekend. And somehow Dave was swept overboard into the water, and he didn't have a life preserver on. They went back and they got Dave. And so Roger came and told me the story, and I thought, wow, what a story. But he said, but you can't say anything. So I've kept this story silent for years.
On one of those trips, Dave caught a couple of quite big fish in Parry Sound. So then he determined they had to be stuffed and mounted. So we found a taxidermist in Parry Sound, and he did it. He did a very nice job. He actually stuffed the fish with styrofoam, and they looked quite lifelike. Unfortunately, David had a mad dog, so he ate them, including the styrofoam. So that was another very typical Dave story.
All I could say, TLC, tender, loving care. Dr. Kline was a very caring and considerate person. When I started working there, it wasn't like a job, it was like a family.
At one of his favorite Italian restaurants, and in a moment of professional self-doubt, I asked Dave whether he had ever had any moments where he doubted his own capabilities, and he shared with me that early on in his career, there was a time where he doubted his own capability as a neurosurgeon, and that what he found key to success was just to continue to work, to continue to practice, and to continue to improve. And for me, that was a really foundational moment of understanding of what the key to success is, that the key isn't some kind of God-given talent, but the key is working hard, continually striving to improve, and continually striving to better yourself.
In addition to running an LSU neurosurgical residency with patient care based at Charity Hospital, Dave carried on a very active private practice at Ochsner Foundation Hospital. There he operated on hundreds of patients with complex nerve injuries and tumors. Dave became recognized as the world's foremost expert in peripheral nerve injuries and tumors. More than 60 neurosurgeons came from around the world to study with and learn from Dave.
There were really only two places in North America that were doing a significant number of peripheral nerve cases, in which was Dave Kline in New Orleans and Alan Hudson, his good friend and colleague at the University of Toronto. And it was an eye-opener for me, because this was a field that I had had very little exposure to, and it was just a gold mine of an area of neurosurgery that needed so much good work done, and the only good work at the time was really being done in those two centers.
I think what will be forever is his impact on the field and the people in the future. Before Dave Kline, there really was no peripheral nerve surgery. It really was an afterthought. Neurosurgery, the board of neurosurgery, was not just brain and spine. It was brain, spine, and peripheral nerve.
The most important thing for me, besides our friendship, was that he believed what I believe, which is that your patient's life is a huge responsibility. And so he influenced so many other people in modern medicine to concentrate on the patient who has that trust in you.
Thus, in a life totally devoted to neurosurgery, and particularly peripheral nerve neurosurgery, Dave, indeed, gained the esteem of virtuous people throughout the world. As a colleague and friend, I watched Dave blossom, ever industrious and completely modest and unassuming about his enormous achievements, never letting on all that he had accomplished.
So, I mean, regardless of whether it was the gardens or the church or neurosurgery or whatever the context, Dave was the same. So they would remember those characteristics about him with a great deal of fondness and humor.
Was a monumental mentor. He taught and gave enthusiasm to the world of peripheral nerve. Everything in peripheral nerve starts and ends with him.
Perhaps one of the most telling is one that sees him earnestly trundling down a medical school corridor late in the evening when most have gone home, Dave's arms full of paper. He's just come from a medical school steering conference. Or I see him again late in the evening as I pass his office on my way home. There he is, behind his paper-strewn desk, head down, bathed in the yellow light, writing away. I pass the door. Good night, Dave. And so, goodbye, Dave. May angels watch over you. Mike.
Thank you for showing me how to have passion for the work that I love. And thank you for showing me how to be a human, to be a good person, to do the right thing, to have integrity and honesty in what I do and how I treat people. I'm going to walk through life, Dad, with your values under my feet, your spirit in my heart. I know you'd be alongside of me, ready to get my back whenever I'm in need. I love you, Dad.